The city lights were hazy and cold, casting long shadows on the streets where Nerissa walked, each step lighter than the last, her breath shallow and strained. It had been a week since she'd fled the facility where they tried to imprison her, her narrow escape leaving her battered but not broken. The grime and dampness of the human city were a far cry from the lush, crystal-laden mountains of her home world, Tlara, which now only existed in her memories. Now, she was alone, alien, a royal princess stripped of her title and forced into hiding on a planet where her name was worth more than her life. Nerissa had evaded capture this long by keeping to the fringes, avoiding the crowded spots and lurking in back alleys. But now she was growing weaker. Her body, used to the rich oxygen of Tlara, struggled against the polluted human air. As she stumbled into the narrow lane behind a row of dilapidated buildings, her vision blurred. Her hand grazed the rough wall to steady herself, but her knees buckled, and she sank to the ground. Just as her consciousness began to slip, a voice pulled her back. "Hey, you all right?" The voice was deep, gruff, and wary. She looked up, her sight clearing enough to see a man with rough stubble, dark hair graying at the edges, and a weary look in his eyes. Tom was the kind of man who moved with a quiet resolve, but right now, his face showed concern and expression Nerissa hadn't encountered since her exile. Still, trust wasn't something she could afford. "Fine," she managed to murmur, her voice barely above a whisper. Her throat felt parched, her alien physiology failing her in the harshness of Earth's environment. "You don't look fine," Tom replied, his gaze scanning her for any signs of harm. He noticed her worn clothes, the tremor in her hands. "You don't have to go anywhere. I've got a place nearby. You can rest, at least for a while." Nerissa knew she should refuse, but the exhaustion was too overwhelming. She nodded, watching him warily as he helped her to her feet. His touch was steady and firm, the warmth of his hand unfamiliar yet strangely reassuring. Tom led her through the back streets to a small, nondescript building on the edge of town. His apartment was modest and cluttered with remnants of a life half-lived. Old maps, pieces of broken machinery, and stacks of newspapers filled the corners. He brought her a glass of water, watching as she drank it with a thirst she could barely control. "So, who are you running from?" Tom asked, taking a seat across from her. His tone was casual, but his gaze was sharp, unyielding. Nerissa hesitated. No one," she lied, her voice barely concealing the fear in her heart. "I don't know what you mean." Tom gave a dry chuckle. "I know a haunted look when I see one. Used to be in the military. You're not the first I've seen trying to escape something." For a moment, she considered telling him everything: the fall of her people, the government's hunt for her, the impossible burden of being the last royal of Tlara. But she held back, merely nodding and casting her gaze to the floor. Tom didn't press her further, and for that, she was grateful. "Stay as long as you need," he said gruffly, standing and moving towards the door. "I'll be back. Just make yourself comfortable. No one knows you're here." As he left, Nerissa sank into the chair, her heart hammering with both relief and fear. For the first time since her exile, she felt a glimmer of safety, but she knew it couldn't last. The hunters would come, they always did. The respite Tom offered was short-lived. Within a day, the city was buzzing with rumors of an alien fugitive, a princess no less, hiding somewhere in the slums. Posters were plastered on street corners, and patrols swept the city with harsh, searching eyes. Nerissa could feel their presence, annoying dread in the pit of her stomach. "Seems they're not making it easy for you," Tom remarked, observing the growing tension in the city. She avoided his gaze, guilt and anxiety stirring within her. "If you need me to leave, I understand. It's too dangerous for you, and I've already put you at risk." Tom waved off her concern. "I've been through worse. Besides, they've got no idea who they're looking for. Just another rumor. One of many." Despite his calm exterior, he was well aware of the danger. The government wasn't known for showing mercy to those who harbored enemies of the state. He brought her a set of his clothes to help her blend in: a baggy jacket and an old baseball cap. "We're going out," he said, noticing her surprise. "You need to know how to stay invisible, and I can't keep you hidden in here forever." Together, They ventured into the crowded streets, moving in silence as Tome coached her on keeping her head down, blending into the flow of humanity. For a brief moment, she felt like she belonged, hidden within the pulse of the city. But her heart raced with every glance, every brush of a shoulder. As they passed an alley, a group of men in uniform rounded the corner. One of them paused, his gaze lingering a moment too long on her face. Tome caught the tension in her stance and gave her arm a reassuring squeeze, guiding her past the patrol with casual ease. "Stay calm," he murmured under his breath. "The more you look like you have nothing to hide, the less they'll notice you." It was a lesson in survival, one she hadn't needed on Talara, but one she knew would be vital on Earth. They returned to his apartment under cover of nightfall, her nerves frayed but her trust in him growing. Tome was a mystery, a man who kept his past locked away, yet his actions spoke of a compassion she hadn't expected. Over the next few days, their connection deepened. He told her about his disillusionment with the government, the loss he'd faced in the wars, and how he'd turned his back on the life they'd offered him. Nerissa shared pieces of her world, the culture of her people, and the beauty of the stars. Their stories intertwined, creating a fragile bond between two worlds on the brink of collision. But it wasn't long before their sanctuary was shattered. Late one night, they heard footsteps outside the apartment. Shadows slipped through the window, cast by flashlights sweeping the alley. The hunters had found them. The low murmur of voices outside grew louder, punctuated by the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Nerissa's heart raced, her mind calculating 1,000 ways they might be captured. Beside her, Tome's face hardened, his eyes scanning the room for an exit. "Stay calm," he whispered, his hand firm on her shoulder. "We're going to get through this." But Nerissa couldn't keep the fear from her eyes. "Why are you risking yourself for me?" The question came out before she could stop it. She needed to understand why this human, so unassuming yet fearless, had put himself in the line of fire for someone as foreign as her. Tome paused, meeting her gaze with an intensity that shook her. "Because I've been in places that would have broken me if someone hadn't taken a chance on me. Besides, it's not right what they're doing to you." Nerissa felt something inside her shift, a warmth she hadn't known since the loss of her family. But there was no time for reflection. The voices outside grew louder, and Tome's grip tightened. "Let's move." He led her through a narrow passageway that connected his apartment to an old storage unit in the basement. Just as they reached the last stair, the door burst open upstairs, and footsteps thundered inside. They waited, barely breathing, as the footsteps grew closer. Tome motioned for Nerissa to follow him, but as they moved through the shadows, a figure stepped into their path, gun drawn and eyes cold. "Tome," the soldier said, a hint of regret in his voice. It was someone from Tome's past, a former comrade who had traded loyalty for a bounty. "You don't have to do this. Hand her over, and we'll forget you were involved." Tome's jaw clenched, and his voice was filled with quiet defiance. "Not a chance." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "You know they'll kill you for this, don't you? You're throwing your life away for an alien." "She's not just an alien," Tome replied, stepping protectively in front of Nerissa. "She's someone they've hunted down and dehumanized just because they're afraid of what she represents. I won't be part of that." The soldier raised his weapon, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world stopped. Nerissa's instincts kicked in, her alien abilities flaring to life as she extended her hand. A shimmering force radiated from her, creating a barrier that pushed the soldier back, his weapon falling from his hand as he hit the wall. Tome's eyes widened, both in awe and fear. Nerissa felt a pang of worrying, wondering if he'd now see her as the humans did an alien, something dangerous. But Tome simply nodded, his resolve deepening. He grasped her hand, pulling her forward as they darted through the basement, leaving the stunned soldier behind. They emerged in a deserted alley, breathing heavily, but the silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Tome looked at her, his face tense. What was that?" Nerissa hesitated, looking down. "A piece of who I am. It's part of my heritage, part of why they fear me." She paused, her voice softening. "I didn't want you to see it like this." Tome's gaze softened. "I've seen worse, and if that's what they're afraid of, then they've got it all wrong." You're not the monster they want you to be. Relief washed over her, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of trust stronger than her fear. They were in this together now, bound by necessity. Yes, but maybe by something more. The escape had bought them time, but the pursuit had only intensified. Government forces and mercenaries flooded the city, offering a hefty reward for anyone with information. News channels broadcast warnings about the alien fugitive, stoking public fear and painting Nerissa as a threat to Earth's stability. With each passing day, it became harder to hide. Tom was beginning to feel the weight of it, the knowledge that he could lose everything: his freedom, his life. But more than that, he was terrified of losing Nerissa. He could see it in her eyes, the way she grew more withdrawn, as if preparing herself for the inevitable betrayal that every other human had shown her. Late one night, while they were huddled in a safe house Tom had set up, a familiar face arrived at their door. It was Leela, a childhood friend of Tom's and one of the few people he trusted implicitly. She entered quickly, locking the door behind her, her face grave. "They're closing in on you," she whispered, casting a cautious glance at Nerissa. Her expression was conflicted, caught between fear and understanding. "I can help get you out of the city, but it's risky." Tom felt a surge of hope, but Nerissa's face remained unreadable. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her tone wary. Leela looked at her directly. "Because I've seen the cost of what my government does to people it fears. I won't be part of that anymore." With Leela's guidance, they formulated a plan to reach an abandoned airfield where a small ship would be waiting to take Nerissa to a safe haven beyond Earth's reach. But as they were making final preparations, Nerissa pulled Tom aside, her face etched with worrying. "I don't want you to come with me, Tom," she said, her voice trembling. "If they find you helping me, you'll lose everything." Tom shook his head. "I lost everything a long time ago. What I have now, what I've found in helping you, that's worth more than anything they can take." But Nerissa's eyes were haunted. "I can't bear the thought of you suffering because of me. I can leave on my own. I'll find a way." He held her gaze, his voice firm. "We've come this far together. I'm not leaving you now." Before either of them could say another word, the door burst open. Soldiers flooded in, weapons drawn, their leader sneering as he laid eyes on Nerissa. "So, this is the alien princess everyone's been whispering about." Leela tried to reason with them, but one of the soldiers grabbed her, holding her back as the others closed in. Nerissa looked at Tom, desperation in her eyes. She could feel her power stirring again, ready to protect them, but Tom placed a hand on her arm. "Don't. They'll use it against you," he whispered. "Trust me." Taking a deep breath, she calmed herself, allowing Tom to take the lead. He raised his hands in surrender, stepping forward. "Let her go. She's just trying to survive." The leader sneered. "We don't negotiate with aliens or their sympathizers." But Tom wasn't backing down. "Then you're making a mistake. Because if you harm her, you'll be the ones who pay the price." The tension hung thick, and in a last desperate move, Leela broke free from her captor, throwing herself at the soldiers and giving Nerissa and Tom the moment they needed to escape. They darted through the side door, sprinting toward the airfield with soldiers hot on their heels. The city lights receded behind them as they raced through the darkness, the roar of engines approaching from every direction. Just as they reached the airfield, the ship came into view, its lights piercing the night. But as they boarded, Tom knew they were running out of time. In one final, heartbreaking glance, Tom realized he couldn't follow her. His life would be a prison, but she deserved freedom. "Go," he urged, pushing her onto the ship. "Get as far away from here as you can." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear and sorrow. "Tom, I can't." But there was no time for farewells. The door sealed, and with a deafening roar, the ship lifted off, leaving him behind as Nerissa watched from the window, her heart breaking as the man who had given her a chance disappeared into the night. As the ship soared into the sky, she vowed she would return for him and for anyone who dared to defy the cruelty of humanity. The ship hummed as it ascended, carrying Nerissa away from Earth, leaving behind the man who had risked everything to protect her. She watched as the blue planet shrank below her, her heart heavy with guilt and resolve. Just as she prepared to set her course for safety, An urgent message came through on her screen. Leela's face appeared, eyes intense. Nerissa, Tom's in danger. The government plans to make an example of him. They're taking him to a secure facility. The thought of Tom, punished because of her, fueled a surge of determination. Adjusting the controls, she redirected the ship back toward Earth, aware of the risks. She wasn't leaving without him. Guided by Leela, Nerissa landed near the facility's perimeter, under the cover of night. She moved stealthily, her powers pulsing beneath her skin. Disabled cameras, flickering lights, and unconscious guards marked her path through the compound until she found Tom, shackled and bruised. His face lit up with relief when he saw her. "Nerissa," he whispered, "you came back." "I couldn't leave you," she replied, her voice firm. Just then, alarms blared. Soldiers charged toward them, but Nerissa unleashed her energy, disorienting them long enough for her and Tom to escape into the night. Outside, Leela waited with a transport ship, and together, they slipped away from Earth's grasp, breaking through the atmosphere just as dawn crept over the horizon. As they drifted into open space, Tom took her hand, a silent bond between them. They didn't know what lay ahead, but as they looked out at the endless stars, Nerissa knew they'd face it together, free at last.